The scream that tore through the canyon that afternoon in 1883 would echo in Vernon Xavier's memory for the rest of his life, not because of its terror, but because it led him to the woman who would become everything to him. He was riding his chestnut mare along the bottom of Red Rock Canyon, about 15 miles outside of Enid, Oklahoma, checking fence lines for the ranch where he worked when he heard it. A woman's voice, raw with panic and pain, calling out from somewhere high above. Vernon pulled his horse to a stop and stood in his stirrups, scanning the rust-colored cliffs that rose 300 feet on either side of the narrow passage. The wind was picking up, whistling through the rock formations, making it hard to pinpoint the source of the sound. Then he heard it again, clearer this time. "Help, please, somebody help me." His eyes finally found her, a small figure in a pale blue dress clinging to a narrow ledge about 200 feet up the western cliff face. Even from this distance, he could see she was in distress. Doubled over, one hand pressed against the rock wall, the other wrapped around her swollen belly, Vernon's heart kicked into high gear. He had spent 26 years in this unforgiving territory, working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, breaking horses that other men deemed too wild, and surviving more than one encounter with both desperate men and dangerous weather. But nothing had quite prepared him for the sight of a heavily pregnant woman stranded on a cliff face with a storm rolling in. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the sandy ground with purpose. "Madam," he called up, cupping his hands around his mouth. "Madam, can you hear me?" The woman's face turned toward him, pale and frightened. "Please help me. My water broke and I cannot get down." Vernon felt his stomach drop. He had helped deliver calves and foals in his time, but a human baby was something else entirely. Still, there was no time to ride for help. The nearest town was Enid, more than 2 hours away by horse, and from the look of those clouds building on the horizon, they had maybe an hour before the wind became truly dangerous. "Hold on," he shouted back. "I'm coming up to you. Just hold on and stay calm." He surveyed the cliff face with practiced eyes. Vernon had done some climbing as a younger man, scaling rocks to retrieve lost calves or repair high fence posts, but this was different. The western face was nearly vertical in places, with only scattered handholds and narrow ledges. One wrong move and he would plummet to his death. But the woman up there did not have the luxury of him being cautious. Vernon secured his mare to a scrub oak, then removed his hat and duster, wanting nothing that might catch the wind or impede his movement. He checked that his rope was secure on his belt, along with his canteen and the knife he always carried. Then he approached the cliff and began to climb. The sandstone was rough under his hands, which was good, giving him purchase as he found his first foothold and pulled himself up. The wind was already strengthening, tugging at his cotton shirt, and he could smell the particular sharpness in the air that meant rain was not far behind. Oklahoma storms in late spring could turn violent without warning, and being caught on a cliff face during one was not something he wanted to experience. "What's your name?" he called up as he climbed, thinking conversation might keep both of them focused. "Florence." The woman called back, her voice tight with pain. "Florence Zimmerman. I'm Vernon Xavier. I work at the Triple Bar Ranch. How far along are you, Florence?" "9 months." Another cry of pain echoed down. "The baby is coming. Oh God, the baby is coming now." Vernon forced himself to climb faster, his muscles burning as he pulled himself up ledge after ledge. His fingers found cracks in the rock, his boots wedged into narrow outcroppings. Twice, chunks of sandstone crumbled under his weight, sending small avalanches of pebbles cascading down, but he held firm and kept moving. As he climbed higher, he could see her more clearly. Florence Zimmerman was younger than he had initially thought, probably around 23 or 24, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and whipped around her face in the wind. Her dress was torn in places, and he could see scrapes on her arms where she had clearly fought her way up here, though why she had climbed up in the first place, he could not begin to guess. "How did you get up there?" he called, now about halfway to her position. "My husband," she gasped. "He brought me up here this morning. There's a easier path on the other side. He said he wanted to show me the view, then he left me here. He took the horses and rode away. Said he did not want the baby or me anymore." Vernon felt anger surge through him, hot and fierce. What kind of man abandoned his pregnant wife on a cliff? But he swallowed the rage and focused on the task at hand. There would be time for anger later. "Did you try to climb down the way you came up?" "Yes, but the contraction started and I got dizzy. I made it to this ledge, but I could not go any further. I have been here for hours, calling for help." Vernon pulled himself onto a wide ledge about 50 feet below her position and paused to catch his breath. His arms were shaking from the exertion, and sweat ran down his face despite the cooling wind. The ledge where Florence was stranded was still a challenging climb away, the rock face between them nearly smooth. "I see a route," he called up. "Give me 5 more minutes." He studied the wall, mapping out his path. There was a narrow chimney crack that ran most of the way up, and if he could wedge himself into it, he could shimmy up to her level. It would be tight and dangerous, but it was the fastest way. Vernon positioned himself in the crack and began to climb, using his back against one side and his feet against the other, inching upward. The wind shrieked through the gap, trying to dislodge him, and his muscles screamed in protest. But he kept the image of Florence's frightened face in his mind and pushed through the pain. When he finally hauled himself onto the ledge beside her, he was breathing hard, his shirt soaked with sweat and his hands raw from the rough stone. But he did not have time to recover. Florence was on her knees, her face contorted in agony, her hands gripping her belly. "It hurts so much," she sobbed. "I can feel the baby coming." Vernon moved to her side, his hand instinctively going to her shoulder. The ledge they were on was perhaps 10 feet wide and 15 feet long, curved back into the cliff face enough to provide some shelter from the worst of the wind, but it was still precarious. One wrong move and either of them could tumble over the edge. "All right, Florence, I need you to listen to me," he said, forcing his voice to stay calm and steady. "I have delivered baby animals before. I know that is not the same as a human baby, but the principles are similar. We can do this, you and me together, but I need you to trust me." She looked at him with wide, terrified eyes, green as spring grass, and for a moment, time seemed to suspend. Despite the dire circumstances, despite the pain etched on her face, Vernon found himself struck by how beautiful she was. And in that instant, something shifted in his chest, something he did not have time to examine but could not ignore. "I trust you," Florence whispered. Vernon nodded and quickly assessed their situation. The ledge was dirty but relatively flat. He pulled off his vest and spread it on the ground, then helped Florence ease back onto it. She cried out as another contraction seized her, her whole body going rigid. "How far apart are the contractions?" he asked. "Close. Maybe 2 minutes. They have been getting stronger." That was not much time. Vernon had seen enough births in the animal world to know that, when contractions came that frequently, the baby would arrive soon. He rolled up his sleeves and tried to remember everything he had ever learned from the ranch wives, who sometimes assisted with difficult calvings. "I need to see how far along you are," he said, knowing this was going to be uncomfortable for both of them but necessary. "I know this is not proper, but there is no other way." Florence nodded, her face flushed. Just help me. Please help my baby." Vernon positioned himself and gently checked her progress, his face burning with the intimacy of it all, but his hands steady and professional. What he found made his heart race. The baby was crowning. This child was coming now, whether they were ready or not. "Florence, your baby is almost here. On the next contraction, I need you to push as hard as you can." The wind howled around them, stronger now, and Vernon could see the first fat drops of rain beginning to fall. He positioned himself to catch the baby, praying to every deity he had ever heard of that he would not drop this precious life over the edge of the cliff. Florence screamed as another contraction tore through her, and she bore down with all her strength. Vernon could see the top of the baby's head, dark hair slick with fluid. The wind whipped at them both, and he hunched his body over to provide what shelter he could. "You are doing great," he encouraged. "One more big push on the next contraction and I think we will have the head." "I cannot," Florence sobbed. "I cannot do this." "Yes, you can," Vernon said firmly, looking up to meet her eyes. "You are the strongest woman I have ever met, Florence Zimmerman. You survived being abandoned on a cliff. You held on for hours waiting for help. You can bring this baby into the world. I know you can." Something in his words seemed to reach her. She nodded, gritting her teeth as another contraction built. This time, when she pushed, Vernon felt the baby's head slide into his waiting hands. He supported the small skull carefully, awed by how tiny and fragile it felt. "The head is out," he announced. "The worst is over. One or two more pushes for the shoulders." The rain was falling steadily now, cold drops that plastered Florence's hair to her face and made the stone beneath them slippery. Vernon angled his body to keep the rain off the emerging baby as much as possible. On the next contraction, the first shoulder appeared, then the second, and suddenly the entire baby slipped free into Vernon's hands. For a moment, the infant was silent and Vernon's heart stopped. Then he remembered what he had seen done with calves that did not breathe right away. He wiped the baby's face clear of fluid and gently rubbed its back. The tiny chest convulsed, and then the most beautiful sound Vernon had ever heard split the air. The baby wailed, a strong, healthy cry that competed with the wind. "You have a son," Vernon said, his voice thick with emotion. "Florence, you have a beautiful baby boy." He quickly used his knife to cut strips from the hem of Florence's already ruined dress, tying off the umbilical cord in 2 places before cutting between them, just as he had done countless times with livestock. Then he shrugged out of his shirt, leaving only his undershirt, and wrapped the baby in the flannel to keep him warm. He placed the infant in Florence's arms, watching as her face transformed from agony to pure wonder. "My son," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My sweet boy." Vernon felt something crack wide open in his chest as he watched her cradle the baby. In that moment, on a cliff ledge in the middle of a storm, covered in sweat and rain and birth fluids, he knew with absolute certainty that he was looking at his future. This woman, this child, they were meant to be his family. The feeling was so strong it nearly knocked him over, but they were not safe yet. The storm was intensifying, the rain now coming down in sheets, and they were still 200 feet up a cliff face with a newborn baby. "We need to get down," Vernon said. "Can you move?" Florence winced. "I think so. But how can we climb down with the baby?" Vernon thought fast. He still had his rope, about 60 feet of good, strong hemp. He could fashion a sling to carry the baby against his chest, then help Florence down. But she had just given birth and would be weak and bleeding. The climb down would be even more dangerous than the climb up. "There has got to be that easier path your husband used to bring you up here," he said. "Can you remember where it was?" Florence looked around, trying to orient herself despite her exhaustion. "I think it was further north along the cliff. There were natural steps in the rock in places where he had secured ropes. "Can you walk?" she nodded, though her face was pale. Vernon helped her to her feet, keeping one arm around her waist for support. She swayed but stayed upright, clutching the baby close to her chest. The rain made the stone treacherous, but Vernon guided her carefully along the ledge, moving slowly, testing each step. They followed the ledge as it curved around the cliff face, and after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, they found what Florence had described. A natural staircase of stone, still steep and dangerous but far more navigable than the sheer face Vernon had climbed. Someone, presumably Florence's husband, had indeed secured ropes at the most difficult sections. Vernon went first, testing each rope to make sure it would hold, then helped Florence follow. She moved slowly, clearly in pain, but she did not complain. The baby remained quiet, nestled against her chest under the makeshift flannel wrapping. The rain pelted them mercilessly, and more than once Florence slipped, but Vernon was always there to steady her. The descent took nearly an hour, but finally, they reached the canyon floor. Vernon's mare was still where he had left her, patiently waiting despite the storm. He helped Florence sit down on a relatively dry spot under an overhang of rock, then quickly retrieved his duster and wrapped it around her and the baby. "We need to get you both to a doctor," he said. "Can you ride?" "I will do whatever I need to do," Florence replied, and Vernon believed her. He mounted his mare and then carefully lifted Florence up in front of him, positioning her so she could cradle the baby safely. Then he kicked the horse into as fast a pace as he dared on the rain-slicked trail toward Enid. The ride to town was a blur of rain and thunder, and Vernon's arms locked around Florence, keeping her upright in the saddle. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her head lolling back against his shoulder, and he talked to her constantly, keeping her awake, telling her stories about the ranch, about the horses he had trained, about anything and everything to keep her engaged. "Stay with me, Florence," he murmured into her ear. "You and this beautiful boy, you both need to stay with me." "I am trying," she whispered back. "Vernon, I am so cold." He held her tighter, trying to share what body heat he had left. The baby stirred and whimpered, and Florence adjusted the wrappings to keep him dry. By the time they reached Enid, the storm had passed, leaving the streets muddy and the air cool. It was early evening, the sun breaking through the clouds in golden shafts. Vernon rode straight to Dr. Harrison's house on the edge of town, calling out before he had even dismounted. The doctor, a gray-haired man in his 50s, came rushing out, took one look at the situation, and immediately helped Vernon carry Florence inside. His wife, Martha, appeared and gently took the baby, cooing over him while the doctor examined Florence. Vernon stood in the hallway, suddenly aware that he was shirtless, covered in mud and blood, and shaking from exhaustion and reaction. Martha Harrison brought him a blanket and a cup of hot coffee, which he accepted gratefully. "That was quite a rescue," she said kindly. "The whole town will be talking about it by morning." "How are they?" Vernon asked. "The baby and Florence." Let the doctor finish his examination. "But from what I can see, the baby is healthy and strong, and your wife is very brave." "She is not my wife," Vernon said automatically. Martha's eyebrows rose. "Oh, forgive me for assuming. The way you were holding her, I thought." Vernon did not know what to say to that. The way he had been holding her, like she was precious, like she was his, because in his heart she already was. Dr. Harrison emerged from the examination room half an hour later. "She is going to be fine," he announced. "Exhausted and suffering from exposure, but no complications from the birth." It is remarkable, really. Delivering a baby on a cliff ledge in a storm. She is lucky you found her, Mr. Xavier. "Can I see her? She is asking for you." Vernon entered the room quietly. Florence was tucked into a clean bed, her hair brushed and her face washed, looking impossibly young and vulnerable. The baby was nestled in a cradle beside her, sleeping peacefully. When she saw Vernon, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart turn over. "You saved us," she said softly. "You saved me and my son." Vernon approached the bed, suddenly shy. "I could not leave you up there. Most men would have ridden for help instead of climbing up themselves, but you came for me." Her eyes filled with tears. "My husband left me to die. He said terrible things, that he never wanted the baby, that I had trapped him into marriage. He rode away and left me there. But you, a stranger, you risked your life to save us." Vernon sat down in the chair beside her bed. "Your husband is a fool," he said bluntly. "Any man who would abandon you does not deserve to call himself a man at all." "I do not know what I am going to do," Florence said, her voice breaking. "I have no money, no home. My family disowned me when I married Jacob against their wishes. They said he was no good, and they were right. But I was 18 and in love, or what I thought was love. Now I see it was nothing but lies. Where is he now? Your husband? I do not know. He took everything. Our wagon, our horses, what little money we had. I imagine he is halfway to Texas by now, running away from his responsibilities." Vernon felt that anger again, hot and righteous. "I will ask around town, see if anyone has seen him. He needs to be held accountable." Florence reached out and caught his hand. "No, let him go. I do not want him any more. I do not want my son to know a father who did not want him. We will be better off on our own." "You will not be on your own," Vernon heard himself say. "I will help you." She looked at him searchingly. "Why, you do not know me." "Maybe not yet," Vernon said quietly, "but I would like to if you will let me." Something passed between them then, a connection that went beyond words. Florence's hand tightened on his and she nodded. Dr. Harrison agreed to let Florence and the baby stay in his home for a week while she recovered. Vernon visited every day, bringing small gifts. A hand-carved rattle for the baby, wildflowers for Florence, fresh milk from the ranch. He learned that she had grown up in Missouri, the daughter of a shopkeeper. She had met Jacob Zimmerman at a dance when she was 18, and he had swept her off her feet with promises of adventure and a new life in Oklahoma Territory. He was charming, she told Vernon one afternoon as they sat in the doctor's garden, the baby sleeping in her arms. "He said all the right things, but after we married, he changed. Or maybe he was always that way and I just did not want to see it. He drank too much, gambled away money we could not afford to lose, and when I told him I was pregnant, he was angry. Said a baby would tie us down." "You deserved better than that," Vernon said. "I am starting to believe that," Florence replied, looking at him with those green eyes that seemed to see right through to his soul. "You have shown me what kindness looks like, what true strength is. You climbed a cliff in a storm to save a stranger. What kind of man does that?" "The kind who could not live with himself if he rode away," Vernon answered. They talked for hours that day and every day after. Vernon learned that Florence loved to read, that she had a sharp wit and a generous heart, that she sang to her baby in a voice like honey. Florence learned that Vernon had lost his parents to cholera when he was 16, that he had worked his way west doing any job he could find, that he dreamed of having his own ranch someday where he could raise horses. "What did you name him?" Vernon asked on the fourth day, nodding to the baby. Florence smiled. "I have been waiting to decide. I wanted to choose something meaningful. I think I will name him Samuel Vernon Zimmerman. Samuel because it means asked of God, and I prayed so hard for help on that cliff. And Vernon because you answered that prayer." Vernon felt his throat tighten. "You are naming him after me. You brought him into the world. You saved his life and mine. It seems only right." "I am honored," Vernon managed to say. "More than you know." By the end of the week, Vernon knew he was in love with Florence Zimmerman. It was not just her beauty, though she was lovely. It was her strength, her kindness, the way she had survived something that would have broken a lesser person. It was the way she looked at him, like he was someone worth knowing. It was the sound of her laugh and the way she held her baby with such fierce, protective love. But he did not know if she felt the same way. She was still married, still recovering from betrayal. It would be wrong to press his suit so soon. So he kept his feelings locked away and just tried to be her friend. On the day Florence was discharged from Dr. Harrison's care, Vernon found her sitting in the parlor, dressed in a borrowed dress, the baby in her arms, her face troubled. "What is wrong?" he asked. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. "Martha has been kind enough to ask around town for work for me, but no one wants to hire a woman with a newborn baby, and I cannot impose on her and the doctor any longer." Vernon had been thinking about this for days. He knew what he wanted to say, what he needed to offer, but he was terrified of overstepping. Still, he could not let her struggle when he had the means to help. "I have an idea," he said carefully. "The Triple Bar Ranch where I work, they have a main house and several outbuildings. One of them is a small cabin that the last foreman used before he retired. It is empty now. I talked to the owner, Mr. Patterson, and he said you and the baby could stay there. In exchange, maybe you could help his wife with cooking and mending. She has been complaining that she has too much work and not enough help." Florence stared at him. "You arranged a job for me, a place to live and work if you want it. No obligation, but it would give you time to figure out what you want to do next. And the cabin is comfortable with a good stove and a real bed. Where do you live?" "In the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands. But the cabin is close by. I could help you with anything you needed. Not too close, though. People would not talk. It would all be proper." Florence was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you doing all of this for me, Vernon?" He looked at her, this woman who had come into his life in the most dramatic way possible, and decided to tell her at least part of the truth. "Because from the moment I heard you calling for help, something changed in me. Because when I held your son in my hands and heard him cry, I felt something I have never felt before. Because when I look at you, I see my future. But I know that is a lot to put on you right now. So I am not asking for anything except the chance to be near you, to help you and Samuel, to be your friend if nothing else." Tears slipped down Florence's cheeks. "You are the best man I have ever known, Vernon Xavier." "Is that a yes?" She smiled through her tears. "Yes. Yes, I will come to the ranch with you." The cabin at Triple Bar Ranch was small but cozy, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area. A separate bedroom and a loft above that could be used for storage. Vernon spent 2 days before Florence arrived cleaning it thoroughly, fixing a broken window and bringing in supplies. Firewood, flour, sugar, coffee, beans, a chicken that would provide eggs. When he brought Florence and Samuel out to the ranch in a borrowed wagon, he watched her face carefully as she saw the cabin for the first time. Her eyes widened and she pressed her hand to her mouth. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Vernon, it is absolutely perfect." He helped her settle in, showing her where everything was, making sure the stove was working properly. Martha Harrison had sent along a proper cradle for Samuel, and Vernon set it up near the bed. As he worked, he was intensely aware of Florence watching him, and when he turned to leave, she caught his arm. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Vernon said. "Just let me come visit you sometimes. That will be payment enough." She smiled. "I think I can manage that." The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Florence settled into her work at the ranch, helping Mrs. Patterson with cooking for the ranch hands, mending clothes and tending the vegetable garden. She was a hard worker, and everyone on the ranch quickly grew fond of her and little Samuel. The baby thrived, growing chubby and healthy, his dark hair coming in thick and his eyes staying the bright blue of newborns. Vernon found excuses to be around the cabin as much as possible without being improper about it. He would stop by in the morning to bring fresh milk or eggs. He came by in the evenings after work to help with anything that needed fixing. On Sundays, their day off, he would take Florence and Samuel into town for church, driving them in the wagon, and afterward, they would have a picnic by the creek. It was during one of these Sunday outings, about 2 months after Florence had come to the ranch, that Vernon finally gathered the courage to speak his heart. They were sitting under a cottonwood tree, watching Samuel kick his legs on a blanket, when Florence said something that gave him the opening he needed. "I received a letter from Jacob's brother today," she said quietly. "He was passing through Enid and someone told him where to find me. He said Jacob went to California, signed on with a cattle drive heading west and kept going. His brother wanted to know if I needed anything, if I wanted to try to contact Jacob." Vernon's jaw tightened. "What did you tell him?" "That I did not need anything from Jacob. That Samuel and I were doing just fine on our own." She paused. "He also said something else. He said Jacob had been telling people before he left that the marriage was not valid anyway because the preacher who married us was a fraud. Jacob apparently knew the man was just a con artist posing as a minister, but he went through with the ceremony anyway to appease me. Then when he wanted out, he figured he had an easy escape." Vernon felt a complicated mix of emotions. "So you were never really married?" "It appears not." Florence's voice was steady, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. "I gave myself to a man who lied to me from the very beginning. I bore a child I thought was legitimate, but Samuel is actually—" She stopped, her voice breaking. "Samuel is a blessing," Vernon said firmly. "It does not matter what some paper says or does not say. That boy is perfect, and anyone who says different will answer to me." Florence turned to look at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You really mean that, do not you? Every word?" Vernon took a deep breath. "Florence, I need to tell you something. I have been holding it in for months now, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you. I have loved you since the moment I saw you on that cliff. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you sing to Samuel when you think no one is listening. I love how you have rebuilt your life from nothing and never once complained. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that not all men are liars and cowards." Florence was crying openly now. "Vernon, I know it is too soon," he rushed on. "I know you need time, but I wanted you to know how I feel. I want to marry you, Florence. I want to adopt Samuel and give him my name. I want to build a life with you, have more children if you want them, grow old together. But only if that is what you want too. I will wait as long as you need. I will wait forever if I have to." Florence reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You will not have to wait forever," she said softly, "because I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you when you wrapped Samuel in your shirt to keep him warm. When you talked me through the scariest moment of my life and never once made me feel ashamed or afraid. Every day since then, I have fallen a little more in love with you. The way you are with Samuel, so gentle and caring. The way you look at me like I am something precious. Vernon, you have given me back my faith in goodness, in love. I would be honored to be your wife." Vernon felt like his heart might burst. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Can I kiss you?" "I thought you would never ask," she whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but she did not. When their lips met, it was gentle at first, tentative, but then Florence's hand came up to the back of his neck and the kiss deepened. It was sweet and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, Vernon was breathing hard. "Marry me soon," he said. "I do not want to wait." Florence laughed, a joyful sound that made Samuel gurgle on his blanket. "How soon?" "Next Sunday. We can go to the church in Enid after the service." "I already asked Pastor Williams if he would do it, assuming you said yes." "You were that confident." "I was that hopeful." "Then yes, Vernon Xavier, I will marry you next Sunday." The wedding was simple but perfect. Florence wore a new dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, pale yellow with white lace at the collar. Vernon wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his boots polished to a shine. Most of the ranch hands came to witness the ceremony, along with Dr. and Mrs. Harrison and various townspeople who had heard about the dramatic rescue and wanted to see the couple unite. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony in the small wooden church, sunlight streaming through the windows. Vernon's voice was strong and sure as he made his vows, promising to love and cherish Florence all the days of his life. Florence's voice shook with emotion, but her eyes never left his face as she promised the same. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and told Vernon he could kiss his bride, Vernon pulled Florence close and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that half the town was watching. She was his now, truly his, and the joy of it overwhelmed him. Afterward, there was a celebration at the ranch. Mrs. Patterson had made a cake, the ranch hands had contributed bottles of whiskey for toasting, and someone brought out a fiddle. They danced in the yard as the sun set, Vernon twirling Florence in his arms, both of them laughing like children. Samuel slept through most of it, passed from person to person, everyone wanting to hold the baby who had been born on a cliff. When the celebration finally wound down and they returned to the cabin, now officially their home together, Vernon carried Florence over the threshold. She laughed and kissed him, and he set her down gently, suddenly nervous. "I should check on Samuel," Florence said, moving to the cradle where the baby was sleeping soundly. Vernon watched her, this woman who was now his wife, and felt a wave of tenderness so strong it nearly knocked him over. He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder as they looked down at the sleeping infant together. "He is ours now," Vernon said quietly. "I know he will always be your son, but I want to be his father in every way that matters. I want to raise him and teach him and love him like he was my own blood." Florence turned in his arms, her hands coming up to frame his face. "You already are his father. You brought him into the world, Vernon, and now you are giving him something even more important. You are giving him a good man to look up to, a man who will show him what love and honor really mean." They kissed again, slower this time, and Vernon felt desire kindle in his belly. Florence must have felt it too because she took his hand and led him to the bedroom. What happened between them that night was tender and passionate. Two people who had been through fire coming together to create something beautiful and lasting. The months that followed were the happiest of Vernon's life. He woke each morning with Florence beside him, her hair spread across the pillow, and went to sleep each night with her in his arms. Samuel grew and thrived, starting to smile and coo, reaching for Vernon when he came home from work each day. Vernon would scoop him up, tossing him gently in the air, delighting in the baby's giggles. "You are going to spoil him," Florence would say, but she was always smiling when she said it. "He deserves to be spoiled," Vernon would reply. "Besides, I am just practicing for when we have more. More. You want more children, a whole houseful if you are willing. Boys and girls. I want this cabin bursting with life and love." Florence would laugh and kiss him, and Vernon knew she wanted the same thing. In the fall of 1883, Vernon started saving every penny he could, planning for the future. He had dreams of buying land, starting his own ranch. Mr. Patterson noticed his ambition and began paying him extra to break the more difficult horses, knowing Vernon had a gift with the animals. By the following spring, Vernon had saved a substantial sum. "What would you think about buying some land?" he asked Florence one evening. They were sitting on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunset, Samuel playing at their feet with wooden blocks Vernon had carved. "Our own land." Florence's eyes lit up. "There is a section about 5 miles west of here, near the creek. 200 acres with good grazing and a flat spot perfect for building a house. The owner wants to sell and move back east. I have been talking to the bank about a loan, and I think we can do it if we are careful." Florence threw her arms around him. "Yes. Oh, Vernon, yes. Our own ranch, our own home." They purchased the land that summer and spent the next year building their dream. Vernon designed the house himself, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and big windows to let in light. He did much of the work himself, with help from friends from the Triple Bar and townspeople who had grown to respect and admire the couple. Florence worked alongside him when she could, painting and planting a garden, making curtains and choosing furniture. By the spring of 1885, the house was finished and they moved in. Samuel, now an energetic toddler running from room to room, delighted by all the space. They named the ranch the Rising Sun, after the way the dawn light looked spreading across the Oklahoma plains. In July of 1885, Florence told Vernon she was pregnant again. He swept her up and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. Samuel, now 2 years old, seemed to sense something exciting was happening and jumped up and down, demanding to be picked up too. Their daughter was born in February of 1886, this time in the comfort of their own bed with Dr. Harrison in attendance and no cliff in sight. Vernon held Florence's hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement, and when their daughter entered the world with a piercing cry, he cut the cord himself with hands that shook with emotion. "She is perfect," Florence said, cradling the tiny red-faced infant. "What should we name her?" Vernon looked down at his wife and daughter, at Samuel peeking curiously from where Mrs. Patterson was holding him in the doorway, and felt his heart overflow. "What about Grace? Grace Adelaide Xavier, because we have been given so much grace, and she is the latest blessing in a life full of them." Florence smiled. "Grace, I love it." The years flowed by, rich and full. The Rising Sun Ranch prospered under Vernon's care. He developed a reputation as the best horse trainer in Oklahoma Territory, with buyers coming from as far as Texas and Kansas to purchase his stock. Florence managed the household and helped with the ranch accounts, her quick mind for numbers proving invaluable. She also started a small school on the ranch for Samuel, Grace, and children from neighboring spreads, teaching them reading and arithmetic. In 1888, their second son was born, healthy and strong. They named him Patrick. In 1890, another daughter arrived whom they called Rose. The house that had seemed so spacious when they built it now rang with the sounds of children laughing, arguing, playing. Vernon added on to the structure twice, building more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Samuel grew into a sturdy, serious boy who loved working with the horses just like his father. He never asked about Jacob Zimmerman, the man who had contributed his blood but nothing else to his life. As far as Samuel was concerned, Vernon was his father in every way that mattered, and Vernon made sure he never had reason to think otherwise. He taught Samuel to ride, to rope, to gentle a frightened horse with patience and kindness. He taught him to read and write and to treat everyone with respect. "You are the best father," Samuel said one evening when he was 10 years old. They were sitting on the porch together, just the two of them, watching the stars come out. "I know I did not come from you, but I am glad I am yours." Vernon's throat tightened. "I am the lucky one, son. I got to bring you into the world and watch you grow. That is a privilege not every father gets, and I could not be prouder of the young man you are becoming." Samuel leaned against him, and Vernon wrapped his arm around the boy's shoulders, thinking back to that day on the cliff, to the moment he had first heard this child cry. Everything good in his life had come from that moment. The children all knew the story of how their parents met, of course. It was a family legend, told and retold around the dinner table and on winter evenings by the fire. Florence would describe being stranded on the cliff, her terror and pain, and then Vernon would take over, talking about the climb, the storm, the moment Samuel was born. The younger children would listen with wide eyes, even though they had heard it 100 times before. "And you really climbed all the way up?" Patrick would ask. "All the way up," Vernon would confirm. "And you caught Samuel when he was born," Rose would say. "Right in my hands. Slippery as a fish." "Tell the part about when you fell in love," Grace would demand. She was the romantic of the family, always the first one to cry at weddings or happy endings. Vernon would look at Florence then, his eyes full of the same love he had felt on that cliff, in that storm, holding new life in his hands. "I fell in love with your mother the moment I saw her. Even though she was in pain and frightened, even though we were in the worst situation possible, I looked at her and I just knew. She was mine and I was hers, and nothing else mattered." "That is not quite how it happened," Florence would protest, but she would be smiling. "You did not even tell me you loved me for months. Just because I did not say it does not mean I did not feel it." "What about Mama?" Grace would ask. "When did you fall in love with Papa?" Florence would reach across the table and take Vernon's hand, their fingers lacing together as naturally as breathing. "I think I fell in love with him when he wrapped Samuel in his shirt, even though it meant he would be cold. When he talked to me so calmly during the birth, like he believed I could do it even when I did not believe in myself. When he risked his life to save 2 people he had never met. That is when I knew what real love looked like. What a real man looked like." The children would sigh happily, and Vernon would pull Florence close and kiss her temple, breathing in the scent of her hair, still unable to believe after all these years that she was his. In 1892, when Samuel was 9, Florence gave birth to their 5th child, another son they named Thomas. Vernon had been worried about Florence, knowing that each birth became more difficult, but she came through it strong and healthy, cradling their newest son with the same wonder she had shown with each of their children. "Are we done now?" Vernon asked, only half joking. "Or are you planning to populate the entire state of Oklahoma?" Florence laughed. "I think 5 is enough, though I would not trade a single one of them." "Neither would I," Vernon agreed. "You have given me everything I ever dreamed of and more." The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By the time Oklahoma achieved statehood in 1907, the Rising Sun was one of the most successful horse ranches in the state. Vernon employed a dozen men, had breeding stock that was sought after across the country, and enough land to support hundreds of head of cattle as well as the horses. But for all the success, what Vernon treasured most were the quiet moments. Sitting on the porch with Florence in the evenings, her hand in his, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Teaching his children to ride, seeing them grow and flourish. The sound of Florence singing as she worked in the kitchen, her voice still as sweet as it had been all those years ago. The feeling of her beside him in bed each night, her warmth and presence the greatest comfort he knew. Samuel grew into a fine young man, tall and broad-shouldered, with his mother's green eyes and a gentle way with horses that rivaled Vernon's own. When he was 19, he married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Emily who fit into the family as though she had always been there. They built a house on the eastern section of the Rising Sun property and started their own family, giving Vernon and Florence their first grandchild in 1895, a boy they named Vernon in honor of his grandfather. "I am too young to be a grandfather," Vernon protested, but he could not stop grinning as he held the baby. "You were young when you became a father too," Florence pointed out. "You do everything early, Vernon Xavier. Grace married at 20, Patrick at 23. Rose showed no interest in settling down, preferring to work on the ranch and train horses alongside her father. "Maybe I will marry someday," she would say. "Or maybe I will just stay here and help you run this place. Either way, I am happy." Vernon supported whatever she chose. He had learned long ago that the greatest gift you could give your children was the freedom to be themselves. In 1900, Vernon and Florence celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary. Vernon arranged for the children to stay with Samuel and Emily for the night, and took Florence on a picnic to the place where he had first told her he loved her, the cottonwood tree by the creek. They spread a blanket under the same tree and shared a meal as the sun set, just as they had done so many times before. But when the food was cleared away, Vernon pulled out a small wooden box. "I have something for you," he said. Florence opened the box and gasped. Inside was a locket, gold and delicate, engraved with an image of a cliff and a rising sun. Vernon took it from the box and fastened it around her neck. "I had it made special," he explained. "The cliff represents where we met, where our life together began. And the rising sun is our ranch, our family, everything we have built. Open it." Florence opened the locket. Inside were two tiny photographs, one of Vernon, one of her, taken just the year before. "Now I will always be close to your heart, just like you have always been close to mine," Vernon said softly. Florence's eyes filled with tears. "Vernon, it is beautiful. You did not need to do this." "Yes, I did. Because sometimes I still cannot believe that I was lucky enough to find you, to be your husband, to build this life with you. And I wanted you to have something to remind you of how much I love you, how much I will always love you." Florence set the locket down carefully and moved into his arms, kissing him with all the passion of their early days together and all the deep, abiding love that came from years of partnership. "I do not need a locket to remind me," she whispered against his lips. "I think of that day on the cliff all the time, how terrified I was, how certain I was going to die. And then I heard your voice calling up to me, telling me to hold on, that help was coming. You have been saving me ever since, Vernon. Every single day you save me with your love." They made love under the cottonwood tree as the stars came out, two people who had been forged together in fire and wind and had emerged stronger than steel. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations, challenges and triumphs. There were hard years when drought threatened the ranch, or when cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There were sad years, like when Mr. Patterson died and they had to say goodbye to a man who had been like a father to Vernon. But through it all, Vernon and Florence faced everything together, their love the bedrock on which their life was built. Thomas, their youngest, grew into a scholar, more interested in books than horses. Vernon encouraged this too, paying for him to attend college in Missouri, swelling with pride when Thomas became a teacher and returned to Oklahoma to open a school in Enid. By 1910, Vernon was 53 years old and Florence was 51. They had 8 grandchildren with another on the way, and the Rising Sun Ranch was a thriving enterprise that would easily pass to the next generation. Vernon's hair was more silver than brown now, and Florence had laugh lines around her eyes, but when he looked at her, he still saw the frightened young woman on the cliff, the brave soul who had brought his first son into the world in a storm. One evening, They were sitting on the porch as they did most nights, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Vernon had his arm around Florence, and she was leaning against him, comfortable and content. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if Jacob had not left you on that cliff?" Vernon asked. It was something he had wondered about over the years, but had never quite had the courage to ask. Florence was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But not in the way you might think. I do not wonder if I would have been happy with him, because I know I would not have been. He was cruel and selfish, and it would have been a miserable life. What I wonder sometimes is how long it would have taken me to find the courage to leave him. Because I like to think I would have eventually, that I would have found the strength to take Samuel and start over, but I am not sure I would have. I might have stayed because I thought I had no choice." She turned to look at Vernon, her green eyes still as bright as ever. "So in a strange way, even though what he did was terrible, I am grateful he left me there. Because it brought you to me. You showed me what real love is, what a real partnership looks like. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible, and I would not trade a single moment of it." Vernon kissed her forehead. "I am the grateful one. You and Samuel saved me just as much as I saved you. Before you, I was just existing, drifting from job to job with no real purpose. You gave me a reason to build something, to be someone better than I was. You gave me a family and a home and more love than one man deserves. You deserve all of it and more," Florence said firmly. "You are the best man I have ever known, Vernon Xavier. The best husband, the best father. Our children and grandchildren are lucky to have you, and so am I." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun finished setting and the first stars appeared. Somewhere in the house, they could hear Rose singing while she prepared dinner, and in the distance, the sound of horses moving in the pasture. This was their legacy, Vernon thought. Not just the land or the ranch or the success they had achieved, but the love they had created, the family they had built, the proof that even something born in crisis and danger could grow into something beautiful and lasting. "You remember what you said to me when we were on that cliff?" Florence asked suddenly. "When I said I could not do it, could not push any more. I told you that you were the strongest woman I had ever met," Vernon said. "That you could bring that baby into the world. You told me I had survived being abandoned on a cliff, that I had held on for hours. That if I could do that, I could do anything." Florence's voice was thick with emotion. "I think about those words all the time, Vernon. Whenever something is hard, whenever I am scared or uncertain, I remember that moment. Remember your faith in me, and it gives me strength." Vernon pulled her closer. "You have always had that strength, Florence. I just helped you see it." "We help each other see it," she corrected. "That is what love is, I think. Being the mirror that shows your partner how strong and good and worthy they are, even when they cannot see it themselves." They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913 with a huge party at the ranch. All 5 of their children were there with their families, along with what seemed like half the state of Oklahoma. There was a band and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Vernon danced with Florence under the stars, the same way they had on their wedding night, both of them older now but no less in love. 30 years, Florence said, looking up at him. "How did we get so lucky we found each other?" Vernon replied simply. "Everything else followed from that." As they grew older, Vernon and Florence began to slow down, turning more of the day-to-day running of the ranch over to Samuel and Rose. They spent their time traveling to visit their children and grandchildren, working in Florence's garden, and simply enjoying each other's company. On a summer evening in 1925, they returned to the place where it all began. Vernon drove Florence out to Red Rock Canyon in their automobile, one of the modern conveniences they had reluctantly adopted. They parked at the base of the cliff and looked up at the ledge where Florence had given birth 42 years earlier. "I cannot believe I climbed that," Vernon said, shaking his head. "I must have been crazy." "You were heroic," Florence corrected. She was 71 now, her hair silver but her eyes still bright. "You were everything I needed in that moment." Vernon looked at the cliff face, remembering every hand-hold, every moment of that desperate climb. "Do you know what I was thinking when I was climbing up to you? I was thinking that I could not let you die. Not just because it was the right thing to do, but because something in me, some part of me I did not even understand yet, knew that you were important, that you were going to change my life." "I was thinking something similar," Florence said. "When I heard your voice calling up to me, telling me you were coming, I felt something shift inside me. Hope, maybe, or fate. I knew you were going to save me, but more than that, I knew you were going to be important to me, to us." She placed her hand on his. "And I was right." They stood there for a long time, two elderly people holding hands at the base of a cliff, remembering the day that had set their life in motion. Then Vernon helped Florence back into the automobile and drove them home to the Rising Sun Ranch, where their family waited. Vernon Xavier lived to be 84 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1931 with Florence beside him. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched over the decades. His children and grandchildren spoke about his kindness, his strength, his unwavering love for his family. Samuel, now in his 50s, his hair graying but still strong, told the story one last time of the day his father had climbed a cliff in a storm to deliver him on a ledge in the wind. "My father was the bravest man I ever knew," Samuel said, his voice breaking. "Not because he did not feel fear, but because he did what needed to be done despite it. He taught me what it means to be a man, a husband, a father. He showed me that love is not just a feeling but an action, a choice you make every day to put someone else first. And he loved my mother with every breath he took for 57 years." Florence lived another 6 years after Vernon's death, and though she stayed active and involved with her family, everyone could see that part of her had gone with him. She spoke of him often, telling stories about their life together, making sure the grandchildren and great-grandchildren understood the legacy he had left behind. On her deathbed in 1937, surrounded by her children, Florence's last words were about Vernon. "Tell him I am coming," she whispered. "Tell him I love him and I will see him soon." Then she smiled, her eyes focusing on something the others could not see, and slipped away peacefully. They buried her beside Vernon on a hill overlooking the Rising Sun Ranch, their headstones simple but elegant. The inscription on Vernon's read, "Beloved husband and father, he climbed a cliff and found his destiny." Florence's said, "Beloved wife and mother, she was his destiny." The story of Vernon and Florence Xavier became part of Oklahoma legend, passed down through generations. Their descendants still run the Rising Sun Ranch more than a century later, keeping alive the legacy of two people who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a love that lasted beyond death. Because sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unexpected places. On a cliff face in a storm where a desperate woman called out for help and a brave man answered. Where a baby entered the world in wind and rain, delivered by hands that were meant to hold him. Where two souls recognized each other and knew, even in that first moment, that they had found their home. Vernon and Florence's love was born in crisis, tested by hardship and strengthened by time. But more than that, it was a love that transformed everyone it touched. Their children grew up seeing what true partnership looked like, what it meant to choose each other every day, to work together toward common dreams, to weather storms side by side. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried those lessons forward, building their own families on the foundation of love and commitment that Vernon and Florence had established. The Rising Sun Ranch still stands today, a testament to what two people can build when they refuse to give up on each other or their dreams. The house Vernon built has been expanded and modernized over the years, but the original structure remains at its heart. The photograph of Vernon and Florence on their 50th wedding anniversary hangs in the front hall. Two elderly people with silver hair and lined faces, holding hands and smiling at each other with the same love that had blazed between them on that cliff in 1883. And if you visit the ranch on a quiet evening when the sun is setting over the Oklahoma plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, locals will tell you that sometimes you can still feel them there. Vernon and Florence, sitting on the porch together, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, watching the land they loved and built together. Still in love, still together, even beyond the boundaries of life itself. Because some loves are so strong, so pure, so fundamentally right that they transcend time and death. The love between Vernon Xavier and Florence Zimmerman was one of those loves. It began on a cliff in a storm and lasted through every challenge life threw at them. It created a family, built an empire, and left a legacy that continues to inspire generations. And it all started with a scream echoing through a canyon, a brave man who chose to climb instead of ride for help, and a baby born in the wind who became the first of many blessings in a life filled with them. Vernon had climbed a cliff expecting only to save a life. Instead, he found his whole world, and Florence, abandoned and terrified on that ledge, had called out in desperation and received not just rescue but everything she had ever dreamed of and more. Their love story was not easy or simple. It was forged in crisis, built on mutual respect and admiration, strengthened by years of partnership and shared dreams. But it was real and true and lasting, the kind of love that only comes along once in a lifetime. The kind of love that changes everything. The kind of love that never, ever dies.